Check, check. Hello, hello. John Themorgile here, checking in for a static plain truth video for you. I hope you do enjoy it. I am John Themorgile, coming to you live from beautiful, well, crappy and rainy Greenville, South Carolina. I hope I find y'all blessed today, and I hope y'all are enjoying your 2024 insofar. Got a feeling it's going to get crazier. What do y'all think? But go ahead and give me a thumbs up when you pop in here. If you can see me and hear me, I would appreciate it. That way I know that I'm live, loud, and clear. Hello, Sean Broker. What's up, buddy? Hope you're doing well, my friend. So good afternoon to you guys. It is February 27th, 2024. 2024 for my vatos. Excuse me. Okay, so a few things that I wanted to kick around with you guys a bit today, because what got me on this mindset that we're going to talk about was a comment from a globe earth persuasion type of person. Hey, what's up, Jeffrey Thomas Hatfield? Doing well, sir. And I tried to pull this comment up so that I could read it verbatim and respond to it, but for the life of me, I can't find it again. But I did respond to the guy, and the gist of his comment got me into this several things that we're going to talk about today. You know how one thing will sort of just lead to another, and they're not necessarily directly related, but sometimes that's how my research goes, where it's kind of like going into Walmart for one thing, right? You go in for one thing and you wind up with 27 other things, right? You know what I mean? So, so the comment was along the lines of, and isn't it funny how the globe earth persuasion questions are phrased so pointedly, almost as if they're like weaponized questions, right? So it's like the comment was along the lines of flat earthers never have an answer for why the satellite dishes on your house are pointed in a specific direction, right? And so the logic of that goes without saying, because of course globe earth believers don't need to actually make their case. They just say how stupid flat earthers are, and you're supposed to run with it all the way to the end. And where they're going with it is, you know, because satellite dishes are pointed in a certain direction, ultimately, therefore, the Earth is a spinning globe in space, right? And the way that we get there is, of course, you know, it's pointing at a satellite. Satellites exist. NASA isn't lying their ass off because satellites exist. Therefore, the Earth is a spinning globe, right? I mean, it doesn't matter that we can demonstrate there's no curvature over literally hundreds of miles, right? No curvature anywhere. And we've been looking for years, like a decade now. And also the Earth is demonstrably and measurably at rest. It's not moving or, you know, spinning around and flying through space as they claim. That's pretty obvious too. Okay. So it doesn't matter that you can prove all of that in spades. Like, there's literally just a never-ending mountain of physical, tangible, demonstrable evidence, you know, in favor of the flat and motionless Earth. But, you know, because the satellite dishes on your house are pointed in a specific direction, you know, we're supposed to run all the way to the end with, you know, the Earth being a spinning globe because satellites are now real. So let's just change the subject a little bit. It's of course related, but let's go back in time to the 1920s when radios were first put in cars, right? But I mean, if you think about that, what an amazing technology that is. I mean, really, what an amazing technology that they can have like a tower out in the middle of nowhere somewhere, broadcasting, you know, invisible waves through the air that's picked up by a little mobile device in your car that I couldn't tell you how the hell it works, but it transmutes through a series of tubes or whatever, the radio waves into audible sound waves, you know, whatever you want to listen to, right? I mean, that's to me, that is such an amazing, profoundly world-changing technology that, it's hard to imagine a world where we didn't have car stereos. But, for the 1920s, it's a pretty amazing technology, I think. But think of how much further that technology could have gone if we hadn't have gotten the bald-faced liars of NASA and the like, right? So they went that way with it instead. Because remember, Nikola Tesla wanted to set up free energy for everybody back, way back then even. And it was basically decided above his pay grade by the likes of, J.P. Morgan and Thomas Edison, right? That they wanted to monetize the crap out of the energy business forever, right? So it just wouldn't behoove these elites, these so-called elites, these good capitalists, no less. It didn't behoove them to have things like free energy. And honestly, I'm quite amazed that even the radio got out. But of course, they did use that as a tool for propaganda as well as just commercial marketing, right? And I think that's great. You can get free services. Everybody thinks that sort of business model started with the likes of Google, but no, you get the free service of these really expensive radio operations that are expensive to set up. But you get that for free, and they monetize it on the back end with advertisers, right? And so that's a brilliant plan. It allowed for people to get this amazing service in their cars. Radio in your car is pretty sweet. And so because I'm thinking of that, I did look into when that first happened. So it was October 6, 1927. The first, in 1924, Kelly's Motors in NSW, Australia, installed its first car radio. In 1930, the American Galvin Manufacturing Corporation marketed a Motorola branded radio receiver for $130. It was expensive. The contemporary Ford Model A cost $540. So it was super expensive, but ultimately it ended up getting cheaper to manufacture the car stereos. And of course, they monetize the whole thing on the back end. They make it a lucrative business by selling the advertising slots to capitalists everywhere, which is, that's great, whatever. But I did think it was interesting that technology came from Australia. Interestingly enough, it was 3 years after that, September 1927, that the first electronic television was successfully demonstrated in San Francisco. Wasn't that at a World's Fair, I think? I think it was. And then, of course, the first feature film, or the first talkie, was October 6th of 1927. So the Roaring 20s was definitely a big decade, right? Especially the second half of it in terms of telecommunications. And I think, it could easily be argued that Nikola Tesla's inventions and patents had a lot to do with that. But could you imagine if electric services was just free, where you could have free energy wherever you go, as long as you're within a certain miles radius of one of these towers? Which is exactly the sort of thing that Tesla, that technology was ready to go back then in the 20s, but it was prevented from coming to fruition so that these, one way to look at it is evil, greedy motherfuckers, and another way to look at it is really good capitalists. They wanted to make money off of this, right? And so let's not forget that our forebears' tax dollars definitely help to pay for the infrastructure that supports this monetized electric grid, right? But then they use that infrastructure that was heavily subsidized by the government, which is AKA heavily subsidized by our tax dollars, our money. Then they turn around and use that device to basically, mind control everyone into a certain altered state of consciousness, lesser vibrational state, and also make money hand over fist through it, right? Where would corporations like Coca-Cola or Mars, M&Ms or whatever, where would they be without this sort of national advertising and distribution system that was all made possible by, you know, by the people, right? And then, of course, only a select few are really heavily profiting off the back end of that, right? So, but anyway, it's just interesting to me that the 1920s was such an explosive time when it came to these really earth-altering, civilization's trajectory-altering advents, right? TV, radio, talkies, amongst other things. But the other thing is, so the thumbnail of the video that you're watching right now, on the bottom left of that thumbnail is a little image of a, looks like a satellite dish. That image I pulled directly from a documentary from the mid-1950s, which is prior to any satellites allegedly being in space, where these US government installations had what looked exactly like cell phone towers or radio towers, as well as radar dishes, satellite dishes, right? Same type of satellite dishes you'll see all over the place today. Prior to satellites, okay? So the thing is, radio frequency delivery was not something that really needed satellites to begin with. That whole thing, like honestly, I'm not really sure how they sold that to everyone, because you know, at the same time, they're laying cables, physical cables everywhere, right? Even up to this day, they use these fiber optic cables across all the oceans from every continent to every continent. There's a physical network, right? And so it's just kind of amazing to me that they were even able to sell the necessity of satellites to the point to where, you know, people think, the majority of people just by default think that everything from like Doppler radar, you know, like, so your weather radar images or animations, they just assume that those are using satellites, but they're not. They're using towers on the ground for Doppler. People just assume that their cell phones are communicating with satellites, right? But they're not even claimed to be. You know, your GPS uses radio triangulation, which is 3 nearby towers, right? That's how they triangulate on your phone, and the service is through the same towers. Your phone isn't even claimed by them to be communicating with the satellite, right? And then, you know, you've got the dish TVs, which they're pointing at something, but I think that it is a stretch to say, you know, these satellite dishes are pointed at something, therefore the Earth is a globe. I mean, you still would have to demonstrate curvature over any distance, which we've never ever found and never will, because it's clearly a plane. And you would also have to demonstrate this sort of ludicrous hypersonic motion and rotational velocity of the Earth, which is never going to happen because the Earth is clearly at rest. Like, it's not even debatable. It is a fixed frame of reference, and you just can't have a spinning ball flying around in multiple curvilinear trajectories behave as a fixed frame of reference. It's not how physics works, right? So again, you know, satellites are used to sort of solidify the mind control programming by, you know, there's a lot of money clearly in the space hustle, right? Because not only does NASA get like the billions of tax dollars annually, but I mean, certainly these advertisers and these, well, really these like communications providers, think like AT&T, the network providers, as well as like cable communications providers that are allegedly paying for use of these satellites in space, when we already know what they're doing. They're using networks, arrays of high altitude, basically weather balloons or communications balloons. They've been doing this since like maybe even the 20s, but definitely since the 1940s. I know that for a fact because I know somebody that was involved in using them for the military, and he told me all about it. That was my grandfather. So they've definitely been using high altitude communications balloons in a military capacity for over like 80 years now, okay? And Nikola Tesla-based technologies, ground-based and tower-based technologies have been able to support things like GPS, like a geological positioning system, and all these other things that are attributed to satellites in these days. But again, they've been acting like they've had satellites since before they've ever said they had satellites in space, right? So it just goes to show that satellites are a psyop in order to justify what is basically a black hole for money that appears to be being used to launder money on an industrial scale. That's my opinion. Whatever they're doing, they're not actually, going to space. And NASA may accomplish things in terms of inventions and patents and whatnot, but it's not the astronauts doing it. We've demonstrated that time and time again. The astronauts, the only thing they've ever invented is the zero-G coffee cup, Don Pettit. Everything else is dudes on the ground on NASA's payroll that are filing for these patents with NASA, definitely not the astronauts. So the whole thing with satellites and spacewalks and Freemasons on the moon, that's all a psyop. And the ultimate goal of that psyop is to keep people in this sort of low vibrational altered state where they're deceived about the very ground that they walk upon, right across the board to the creator. Like, what is our purpose on this spinning ball in space, right? Our purpose on this spinning ball in space is pretty abysmal if you really think about it. But again, that's just a deception, right? So they've been using this sort of great deception, this massive mind control campaign, in order to divorce us from our history, from our inheritance, and from our true potential as a connected spiritual race of beings, right? And what they want above all else is they want us divided amongst one another, fighting amongst ourselves, polarized on every possible metric they can possibly think of, everything from, I won't even get into examples. I mean, you all know the ways we're divided. I've actually got a video that I created years ago with several different ways that we're divided, and hardly nobody watched it. So maybe check that out when you get a chance. I'll try to remember to put a link here, but they've made an art out of the ways that we are divided, black and white, illegal immigrants and citizens. They want us at each other's throats for one main reason, and that is so we don't realize that it's these 1% elites that are really inflicting harm on us on an industrial scale and deceiving us for their own benefit, to make sure that we're just clever or just smart enough to behave as automatons, or essentially slaves, more or less, and not smart enough to realize that they're the ones that have the whips and the chains, and they're not physical whips and chains anymore. They are psychological whips and chains, right? Back onto the subject of satellites. So, if you just, for the sake of argument, give them the benefit of the doubt, and there are a lot of people who would say that this is, that we shouldn't argue this far, but you're going to run into people that are going to have questions about satellites, and they really think there are satellites up there. And so sometimes you have to say, okay, so there's satellites up there, fine. So you're saying that you believe that some of these communication satellites, these geostationary satellites, which they claim are like over 20,000 miles high, 20,000 miles up, okay? You believe that this satellite is sending and receiving data to the little generic, metal and plastic dish on the side of your house? 20,000 miles away? Good luck with that. Good luck getting a radio frequency connection over, 200 miles. And you can do it, but good luck doing it with like a walkie-talkie or the equivalent. The power output on these alleged satellites, these geostationary satellites, are less than a toaster, right? And supposedly they've got these nuclear type power generators on them so that they don't ever need to be serviced. They don't ever need to, be recharged. Their electrical components don't ever need to be grounded out. They can just keep on gathering static electric buildup until eternity, and they're fine. There's no sort of short circuits from that. The whole thing becomes absurd when you think about it. Not to mention, let's back up the wagon here a minute. The whole thing with an orbiting satellite, even the geostationary communication satellites, allegedly 20,000 miles away, they pre-require the Earth to be a spinning globe in outer space in order for that whole thing to even register as possible, right? And the thing is, there's no curvature to the world, and it's not spinning around. And we know this now, and so necessarily satellites don't exist. And yes, NASA is lying their asses off, and they've been doing so since day one, since they were literally set up by actual Nazis. Okay, so big surprise, right? Big surprise on that. And let's not forget the underwater cables that I mentioned a minute ago. And this has actually come up recently in the news. Y'all might have caught this, that one of these, I guess it was the Houthis over there, that we are definitely not fighting a proxy war with. They threatened to cut those cables, right? Those undersea cables if the US continued their, not doing their proxy war, right? So, it's funny that they mention that, because our modern society relies on that so heavily, because there really truly isn't a satellite network. Now, granted, I do believe they have a network of these high altitude balloons that function as satellites, but let's face it, there's nothing better than a direct fiber optic connection, right? So anytime you have the capability to go RJ45 as opposed to a Wi-Fi, router or whatever, it's better for your latency to do the hard cable anytime, right? And especially when you're dealing with networks of hypothetically satellites on balloons that we know that they have, you're going to have instances where, like, you've got bad weather, or you've got like solar flares and things like that, electromagnetic storms, to where those links are going to go down periodically and frequently, so I would imagine. And so they definitely want to have the sort of backup with the hard cables going, internationally everywhere. And then also the network of the radio towers, right? So they're utilizing a variety of things, but the thing is they're definitely not using orbiting satellites. Like, they couldn't be. It's impossible. And so to answer the question, like, so what is the dish at your house pointing at? Frankly, I'm not at liberty to answer that. I don't know what it's pointing at, but I do know that it's not pointing at a satellite 20,000 miles in altitude orbiting, right? Because that's impossible. It couldn't be. So it's definitely pointing at something else. I've theorized, and this is just my opinion, that there's probably something like a natural electromagnetic field of the Earth, that they're just tapping into that, and it's at a certain angle. That's what I think, but it could be anything from an array of balloons in that direction. It's just they're all on that same frequency, angle, whatever. I don't know. But the thing is, I don't have to answer that, because all I have to do is prove that there's no curvature, prove that the Earth is motionless, which is, again, it's demonstrable. It's obvious for anyone who cares to look. And beyond that, there's really, it's nothing that stumps me, because at the end of the day, it's pretty obvious to me that satellites could not possibly exist. They're totally irrelevant. They never were anything that could have been relevant. The US military had the capacity to send up high altitude communications balloons since at least the 1940s, way before the first satellites were allegedly sent up. there's no point in having satellites. It's just a huge waste of time, a huge waste of money, and yet they're still paying people like Elon Musk and his company billions of dollars to allegedly send up satellites. And they do a spectacle of it too. But I'm here to tell you that that's all a big scam too, in my opinion. But what do I know? I'm just a stupid flurfer. But bringing it back to the beginning, I think that free energy society is one way or another right around the corner. Tasha Teeling says, wonder how you can skip radio signals off the ionosphere sometimes, but other times it goes straight through to the space station. So you're talking about like LORAN? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so, the thing with the LISS that I have the biggest problem with is, so the LISS, the International Space Station, you can see it with your telescope, right? If you know where to look at the right time, and they've got an app for that. People can see it, right? Well, the thing is, it's supposedly about the size of a football field, and it's over 250 miles up. Okay. The thing is, from 250 miles away, how are you going to expect to see a football field-sized object, right? For one thing, it has no sort of lighting to speak of. It's not like we're talking about a brightly lit thing. It's metal. Maybe there's some diffused lights on the inside of it, but it's not like it's a stadium light or something, right? An object that size from over 250 miles away, the angular size of the object would be too small for us to get a glimpse of. And so the fact that observers on the ground can see an object that is supposedly the International Space Station proves that they're lying, because you would never hope to get the angular resolution of that object from 250 miles away would be way too small to see. Like, think about it. Like, if you've seen an airplane that's at 30,000 feet, you can barely see it, right? And that's like, what, 6 miles or something? And granted, the ISS is bigger than an airplane. But if an airplane is a little tiny dot, barely visible at 30,000 feet, imagine that 250 miles away. And I don't care if it is the size of a football field, right? Because a big plane is pretty damn big too. I mean, we're not talking about that much bigger for the LISS. And so again, the fact that we can see something that they're calling the ISS proves that they're lying about what it is or how far that it is. Do I have some smoking gun evidence of them lying about that? Well, no, of course not. See, that's the thing about NASA, is everything that they claim is beyond the realm of demonstrability or falsifiability. There's no sort of smoking gun evidence that I do not have an invisible dragon in my garage, right? I mean, sure, I can tell you that I've got an invisible dragon in my garage, and I might even be able to give you some circumstantial evidence for it and a damn good story about it too. But you're never going to have some smoking gun evidence that I don't have an invisible dragon in my garage, especially not when it's, all clouded and top secret, big budget, nonsense. Clandestine. It's national security, right? So, yeah. So no, I don't have any smoking gun evidence of what the LISS is, right? But I can tell you that it's not a football field-sized object some 250 miles away. It couldn't be, because otherwise people wouldn't be able to see it. So it's something else. What that is, I don't know. Could it be some application of Project Bluebeam? Maybe. I could definitely see that being a possibility. Could it be a very high altitude, something like a B-2 spy plane dressed up to look like the ISS? I don't know, maybe. But again, it's not my position to speculate on that. We know that they're lying, for one thing, because again, the International Space Station requires spinning ball Earth in infinite space. And we already know that's a load of crap. So they're definitely lying. But there is not going to be any sort of piece of demonstrable evidence to show what exactly it is that they're doing until maybe we get some internal documents from NASA, of what it is they're actually doing with that. But whatever. It's definitely not what they say it is, and there's definitely not little Freemasons up there in space, in the stratosphere or whatever. Couldn't be. So I just pray, you guys, that we're able to see this sort of technology that we're talking about, this free energy technology that we do have the capability to produce. The Earth itself is a never-ending free energy dynamo. We don't have to necessarily worry about things like solar and windmills. That's, it's a shame because those are interesting endeavors. But, frankly, from what I gather, all you have to do is set up a couple of towers in a specific way and, drive some copper rails into the ground and have your Tesla coil on the top of this tower, and you have a couple of towers, and where their fields intersect, you've got basically free energy capability. And they just use the Earth and the atmosphere plane itself as their connectivity, right? And it does appear that these lost ancient civilizations, Rosie Krupp, this is exactly the sort of technology that they were tapping into with these great monolithic sites and even the cathedrals and things like that. One thing I found to be interesting, and I got to thinking about this, I wanted to mention to y'all and see what y'all think, but isn't it interesting how, so y'all have all probably heard the Iron Republic story, right? I've got the audiobook on my channel if you haven't, but basically the Iron Republic story was from the late 1800s, early 1900s, where dude basically took his fortune and sailed beyond the South, the Antarctic, and found his way into another part of the realm, beyond the known realm that we have here on the so-called globe, within the known Mercator projection maps. He got out beyond that and allegedly brought back technology from this sort of breakaway civilization that was more or less cousins to the alleged settlers to America, the colonizers of America. So they were of European descent, but their technology had sort of broken off and gone its own direction from ours. And according to the Iron Republic story, they had things described like television sets, wireless radio, and that sort of thing. And this was from the late 1800s. The thing was written in like 1900 or 1901 is when it was published, right? Okay, so with all that in mind, and again, the dude who claimed to have found the Iron Republic and made it back claimed to have brought samples and diagrams and schematics for all these technologies right before the turn of the century. And as fantastical as that sounds, ain't it interesting that right after that, we got things like manned flight, right at the turn of the century, and then all these other things we mentioned, like wireless communications. And yeah, Tesla got credited for a lot of that, and I'm sure he was a brilliant inventor, but there is a possibility that that stuff was not necessarily invented by Tesla and these other guys, but was discovered and reintroduced as their own brainchild. But in fact, it wouldn't surprise me in the least to find that the previous civilization that was sort of buried and covered over and forgotten by our modern times, I wouldn't be surprised at least to find that they had exactly these sorts of technologies, free energy, and whatever output devices you can think of. Clearly the builders of these monolithic and megalithic sites They had capabilities beyond what we have, obviously. They had the ability to build with massive, unimaginably heavy stones and cut through the hardest materials like it was butter, and do so with laser precision. And clearly they were a highly, highly advanced civilization. And I believe it's pretty obvious that they had free energy technology that the powers that be in this world, for whatever reason, absolutely dread for us to have, because I really don't understand why. I mean, really the only thing I can think is that we're dealing with actual evil personified, some anti-human demonic entities, spiritual wickedness in high places that has been basically treating us like cattle and keeping us dumbed down so that we are none the wiser of their control grid that we are finally breaking free of. Thank the Most High Creator, right? Thank God. But I think we've got a long way to go, folks, in terms of waking people up, and also being mindful not to let these sort of psychopathic archons divide us, on these trivial matters, right? A lot of people are decent, loving, caring, empathetic people. There are some evil bastards in this world, I will tell you, just unthinkable MFers, right? But what can you do about that? Rosie Krupp, new lockdown is coming soon. I don't know. I have been hearing things about this Candida aura. I'm not sure if y'all have heard anything about that, but just wash your hands. It's a fungal infection. And whatever your views on viruses are, this ain't a virus. It's a fungal infection. And from what I gather, it's like 60% fatal. So just, definitely wash your hands. Nimble Horse hates YouTube, and James T, false flags. Yeah, there's so much going on right now, you guys. We've just got to be mindful, I think, and just try not to let it get you down. Try not to react in the ways that they want you to react, because there's plenty of people already that are just reactionary. They're not really thinking much for themselves, and they're just so angry at everybody. But we sort of need to redirect that anger to the right direction. And I think we've got it made in the shade. Just love each other, though, right, man? And I do appreciate y'all hanging with me. I'm going to wrap this one up, but thanks so much for sitting here with me. And by the way, I sure could use your help. If you would like to support the channel, links are below. We are in a precarious situation, but hopefully at the end of this, and I'll keep y'all posted if we're able to finally get the trailer finished and moved into that. One love, you guys. I appreciate you much, and I will see you very soon in the next one. Y'all be good.